live so that when the call comes, you can walk away easily.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of the Spiritual Survival Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Brown. Our team's mission is to help you have eyes to see the times we are living in. Take unprecedented measures to prepare yourself spiritually for the events that will precede the second coming of Jesus Christ. If the mission of our podcast resonates with you, please click subscribe, like, and share this content. Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of Spiritual Survival. Today, I'm going to be talking about what I feel the Spirit has taught me in President Eyring's talk. And I've come to realize that it's not always the exact words they say, but more importantly, what the Spirit may teach you in some of these conference talks. And before we jump into that, I want to just thank everybody for their comments last week. I asked a question last week about if you feel you've had, or do you feel you've had an awakening to the times we're living in? And it was just overwhelming how many people responded and said, yes, they feel like they've experienced this awakening that we've been talking about. And last week we talked with Avraham Gileadi about specifically an awakening to your end time role as kings and queens of the Gentiles. And so today, I'd like to start by posing this question. Do you see what I see in President Eyring's talk? And recently we've discussed President Nelson's talk and President Holland's talk. And I've kind of shared some of the things I felt the Spirit taught me through the lenses that I see these talks. So I'd be interested to know if you're seeing the same things, or if you're seeing unique and different things. I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on that. So President Nelson has said, seek to be taught by the Lord himself. And that particular phrase struck me and has stayed with me as very, very powerful. And so again, what did the Spirit teach you in President Eyring's talk? So again, today I'll share some of my thoughts. And again, this is through my personal lens. And if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you probably have a pretty good idea what my lens is. My lens is pretty much anything having to do with becoming kings and queens of the Gentiles and fulfilling our end time role as the tribe of Ephraim. Anything to do with Isaiah and the types and patterns that we see in Isaiah that give us a real nice view of what's coming in these end times, as well as the Book of Mormon and the types and patterns that those who compiled the Book of Mormon gave us, because they have seen our day, and they very carefully chose the 100th part of their records to include as prophetic types for our time. And then pretty much anything having to do with an end time exodus. So again, those are the things that make up the lens through which I'm seeing this. And again, I do feel that the Spirit can teach us different things depending on where we are in life, what we're focused on, what we're searching. I prayed very hard this last general conference that the Lord would speak to me through the talks. And again, I do believe that the Spirit speaks things that aren't necessarily word for word in the text. So we'll get more into this in a little later in this presentation, but the question I present to you is, did President Eyring use a pattern in his conference talk? I saw one, and perhaps that was the Spirit speaking to me. And we'll talk through more of the details on this here shortly. But here's a question I pose to you, and please go to the comment section and respond to this. Are we currently in a spiritual exodus? Are we in an exodus from Babylon to temple covenants? And I think it was very clear in this last general conference that nearly every speaker spoke about temple covenants and being in the temple and making and honoring these temple covenants. And so to me, it seems like, in a way, we're in a spiritual exodus out of Babylon. There are a lot of scriptures that talk about being gathered into garners. And a few years back, one of the apostles spoke on being gathered into garners. And when you look at these scriptures, it's talking about being gathered into these places of protection, as a protection from the storm. And in Isaiah terminology, anytime we see that word storm, that has to do with the end time tyrant, the Antichrist, or as Isaiah refers to him as the king of Assyria. And the gathering of Israel is a gathering to the covenant that God made with Israel. And so is there a parallel between garners and the covenant that God made with Israel? Our temple covenants, the garner. This was something from President Eyring's talk that really rang true to me, and kind of gives me the feeling that these temple covenants are the garner referred to in the scriptures. He said, the safest place to be spiritually is living inside your temple covenants. Once we make a covenant with God, we leave neutral ground forever. And God will not abandon his relationship with those who have forged such a bond with him. In fact, all those who have made covenants with God have access to a special kind of love and mercy. And there's a term in Hebrew called hesed, which is this concept that there's not really a good definition for it in English, but I guess you could say it's an everlasting, eternal love and mercy, where God's part of the covenant is he will never stop coming after us, even though we may stray. He never gives up on us. So it looks like that we are in a spiritual exodus right now, that our prophets and leaders have encouraged us to be in the temple, to flee Babylon, flee to this protection that are like garners that are to be found in temples and temple covenants. But do we also have a physical? Is there also a physical place of protection that we could be called to? So question I'll pose is, do we have eyes to see patterns? And this is kind of what I've learned over the last 4 years, is that the scriptures are full of patterns, and the more we gain the ability to see these patterns, the more we can see how Hebrew prophets prophesied. So over the last 4 years, the Lord has been teaching me to have eyes to see prophetic warnings that are embedded in types and patterns in the scriptures. But it's one of the questions I'm throwing out there is does this ability to see patterns and types, is it only in the scriptures, or can it be with modern day prophets as well? So these are very evident in the Book of Mormon, and So, why does the Book of Mormon contain so many patterns of exoduses and wilderness journeys? Last week when Abraham was on with me, he mentioned he's been able to identify anywhere from 7 to, I think he said 7 to 12 different exoduses in the Book of Mormon. And, I've been really looking for those as well. And what's so interesting is this book, this incredible book, the Book of Mormon, actually begins with a wilderness journey and an exodus on page 1, First Nephi chapter 1. So why is that the case? Why is this pattern repeated so many times? Is there something we're supposed to be seeing? Is there something that those who compiled the Book of Mormon saw in our time, that they included these accounts for us specifically? So in the Book of Mormon, we see a pattern and a type of a first exodus. This is a type of a first exodus that will take place in the end time. And this actually comes from our block of study this week in Come Follow Me. So the first one is found in Mosiah chapter 24. And starting in verse 16, it says, "On the morrow, I will deliver you out of bondage." And I think that phrase "on the morrow" is really important because it indicates that the Lord had a miraculous deliverance for them and an exodus journey for them, but there wasn't a lot of lead time, and they had to be prepared to drop everything and go. And then in verse 17, "And he said unto Alma, Thou shalt go before this people, and I will go before thee and deliver this people out of bondage." So Alma played a role. He was a type of a servant that will be part of leading this first exodus in the end time. And then verse 19, "And in the morning," so again here they just had such a short time to heed the Lord's warning and be prepared. "The Lord caused that a deep sleep should come upon the Lamanites, yea, all their taskmasters were in a deep or in a profound sleep." And then verse 20, "And Alma and his people departed into the wilderness." So here a type of an exodus into a wilderness journey. "And when they had traveled all day, they pitched their tents in a valley that they called the Valley Alma, because he led their way in the wilderness." And so a type of this first Exodus journey and a type of someone who will lead the way. So also in our block of scripture for this week's Come Follow Me, we see a second type, second Exodus type in Mosiah 22. And this is Limhi's people. Limhi's people were quite a bit different. They weren't as faithful and believing as and submissive as Alma's people. These were people who needed to go through more of a sanctification process, and they had to be actually brought to the dust. They actually tried 3 times to deliver themselves rather than submitting and relying on the power of the Lord. This people did not have a covenant relationship with the Lord. And they needed to experience a deep descent phase in order to be sanctified enough to be ready to ascend what Isaiah refers to as that spiritual ladder. And because of this, God sends deliverers to them. And through these deliverers, the Lord miraculously provided a way for them to be delivered and to enter the wilderness journey and arrive back at the land of Zarahemla, which would be a type of Zion. So again, what is the Lord's pattern for those living in covenant lands? We know that America is a covenant land. Does the Lord have a pattern that he has shown us over and over about how he deals with those that live in these covenant lands? This is from Ether chapter 2, starting with verse 8. And whoso possesses this land of promise from that time henceforth and forever should serve him, the true and only God, or they should be swept off when the fullness of his wrath should come upon them. I don't think it's too far-fetched for us to look at what's happening in our country and in the world, but specifically America, because America is a covenant land, a land of promise. And we've seen examples. They've included, those who compiled the Book of Mormon included accounts of people who have been swept off because they did not live up to this covenant. And so I know there's some that maybe don't want to believe this or don't want to look at this, that we may be really at the ripening point here in our country now, and that the sweeping off may not be too far in our future. So those are just a few of the many patterns in the Book of Mormon. Let's look at what is Isaiah's pattern. And this is a verse from Isaiah 57. The righteous disappear, and no man gives it a thought. The godly are gathered out, but no one perceives that from impending calamity. The righteous are withdrawn. So we're seeing an end time, a pattern and a type of an end time exodus, that the righteous will all of a sudden disappear. A little bit like Alma's people disappeared in this account in the Book of Mormon. And nobody really notices. And the godly are gathered out. But you notice it's the righteous and the godly that are the ones being gathered out and withdrawn. So from my best understanding of what's depicted in the book of Isaiah, there are going to be two exoduses. That it prophesies of two exoduses in our day. The first exodus is an exodus of the elect, or the godly, who are gathered, or we could say called out. And as they depart on this exodus, they are created into what Isaiah refers to as the son servant level. That's an exalted level of exaltation, as they are brought to Zion amid calamities. So it sounds like this wilderness journey that they're called into has a very sanctifying effect, as they pass through calamities and are brought to Zion. Many of these become the kings and queens of the Gentiles that we've talked about. That this is probably a preparation to help them ascend spiritually to the level where they can perform this role as kings and queens of the Gentiles. And we talked a little bit about that last week. And that there will also be a second Exodus. And these kings and queens of the Gentiles will go out and gather the people that Isaiah refers to as the Zion Jerusalem category, that are at that level spiritually. You might say these are the ones that are, in covenant with Christ, have come to Christ, born again, have received a remission of their sins, but not yet at an exalted state. And that all their enemies will be put down, but they may be needed a little more time, a little bit more refining to endure, and that they will be gathered out by the kings and queens. Here's another verse from Isaiah, saying the same thing. It says, I have charged my holy ones, called out my valiant ones. And I love that it uses the word valiant. I think it was Elder Christofferson in this last conference talked about the need to be valiant in our testimonies of Jesus. That those who attain a celestial level are the valiant ones, those who are valiant in the testimony of Jesus. And the terrestrial level are those who were good and, we're good people, but and receive the testimony of Jesus, but we're not valiant in it. So it sounds like this exalted level that's being called out. These are the ones that were valiant in the testimony of Christ. And it goes on, my anger is not upon those who take pride in me. And again, anger in the book of Isaiah is a pseudonym, a metaphorical pseudonym for this end time king of Assyria or Antichrist figure. So down here below, Jehovah's anger is the king of Assyria, Babylon, as Isaiah calls him, and that he can't harm Jehovah's elect, these holy ones and these valiant ones, when the day of judgment comes. And so it feels to me like everything that our prophet and the leaders of the church are asking us to do is in preparation to become these holy ones and these valiant ones, in preparation for this day of judgment that's soon at our door. After the righteous are gathered out, those who remain will suffer calamity as the day of judgment overtakes them. So this is all preparation for us to be spared some really serious things. So getting back to President Eyring's talk, is it possible that there was a type and pattern in President Eyring's talk, just like the types and patterns we see from these ancient prophets? I believe that I saw one. But that, again, is the lens that I'm seeing things through. So a question, why has President Eyring related this account twice in general conferences? I believe the first time he did it was in 2021, and I believe I saw the pattern there. And but when he shared the same account again in April, that really made me stand up and pay attention. Another question I pose, is the full meaning veiled from those without eyes to see? So just like when Nephi was told to stop writing the things that he'd seen in his vision of the end time, there were things that could only be given to us in types and patterns from Isaiah or John. Is this kind of the same thing? Was it for those who are seeking to be taught by the Lord himself? And is that why President Nelson is asking us to seek to be taught by the Lord himself? So again, the question I pose is, why did the Lord forbid Nephi to finish writing his end time vision? Why was he only permitted to use Isaiah's types and patterns? Is it possible, and again, I'm not trying to put words in President Eyring's mouth or to say that this is exactly his intention, but this is what I feel the Spirit taught me. And again, it's probably because of the lens through which I'm seeing things, but could a similar restriction like that put upon Nephi be upon our living prophets today? Are there things regarding the end time that they are not to speak about openly to the world, and that might be somewhat veiled in conference talks? And is this why President Nelson is saying, seek to be taught by the Lord himself? Are there things we are only allowed to be taught by the Lord himself that they're not to come from any man, because the power with which they need to come into our hearts is something that has to come through the Spirit? Is the Lord requiring us to have eyes to see what living prophets are saying? So just like we need the spirit of prophecy to understand the book of Isaiah, and he talks about needing to understand the manner of prophesying amongst the Jews, which is this use of types and patterns. Do we need some of those similar things, particularly the spirit of prophecy, to see what our modern day prophets, our living prophets, are saying? Did President Eyring share something from his past as a type. So I posed that question to you. Did he share something from his earlier days that was given to us as a type? And is there a pattern that we are intended to discern through the Spirit as taught by the Lord himself? So I'm going to pull up his talk here. And so here is the pattern that I saw in President Eyring's talk. The first part of this pattern was a catastrophic calamity. And again, he shared this through something historical from his life. But for some reason is giving it to us in a general conference talk. He said the newly constructed Teton Dam in eastern Idaho had collapsed. More than 80 billion gallons of water were flowing through the dam into the 300 square miles of neighboring valleys. Much of the city of Rexburg was underwater, with homes and vehicles carried away by floodwaters. 2/3 of the 9,000 residents were suddenly homeless. So here's this first part of this pattern that I saw, is he's sharing a catastrophic calamity from his own life. To me, that seems like a type. Secondly, he's talking about how there was no way of communicating. So if something like this were to happen in our day, would we see these same things? Would there be no way for us to communicate or reach out to our family members? He mentioned all roads were closed. Would we see the same thing? Would roads be broken up perhaps by an earthquake? We couldn't travel or check on family members. No way to get news, no way to know how our loved ones are doing. And then he went on to talk about how upset his wife was, and asked how he could actually sleep. They had to check into a local motel, because they couldn't get back. And he just testified that when I'll just read it. It says, the sealing ordinance is found only in the house of the Lord, administered by proper priesthood authority, had bound us together as husband and wife, and our children had been sealed to us. There was truly no fear, and we were grateful later to learn that our boys were safe. So their own children were 30 miles away in Rexburg, and they had no way to know what had happened to them. And he just testified of the peace that we can have in our covenant connection with God. And my question is, will we need to be prepared for something similar, and to have this type of covenant connection with the Lord where we can have peace in not knowing? And then the last part of this pattern I saw was a prophet's directions to live so that he would be prepared and able to walk away. He talked about how President Kimball had spoken to him and his wife at their sealing, and had counseled them to live in a way where they could be prepared to walk away. And so I wondered, what would be the purpose of President Eyring sharing that in a talk for the entire church? And so I want to share this quote. He said, our family was ready to leave because a prophet in a holy temple, a place of revelation, saw a future event for which we were then prepared. Could our modern day prophets have they seen future events that we will need to pass through? And for those with eyes to see, is this a pattern warning us to be prepared in the same way? he goes on, he said, we did our best to live our lives in such a way that we would be prepared to leave to serve the Lord when the call came. And so I pose another question. Is there a call for us in our future? It sure seems like it's throughout the scriptures. Book of Mormon, Isaiah. And is this a modern day warning? For me, it felt like it. It felt like it through the Spirit. And so question I pose in wrapping this up is do we have an exodus to prepare for in our future? Do we have to have, do we have to be prepared ourselves to walk away? Could the call come suddenly like it did to Alma's people, where the Lord said, on the morrow, you're going to need to depart, and I will deliver you with power. I would say that prophetic patterns seem to indicate that they've seen our future. They've seen our day. And I believe this is a warning, and I would be very interested in each of your thoughts. Thank you for being with us on the Spiritual Survival Podcast. Again, if the mission of our podcast resonates with you, please click subscribe, like, and share this content.